They greeted me with smiles, uttering, "Thanks for the wedding present." All the while, my parents had surreptitiously sold the sole inheritance from my grandfather, my cherished lake house. This wasn't merely a dwelling, it was a repository of my childhood, a place where I spent summers fishing, mastering repairs, and witnessing breathtaking sunsets over the water. It was the only time I ever truly felt acknowledged, and they parted with it for her. My sister's wedding had been an extravagant affair, costing a staggering $150,000, complete with bespoke flowers, an imported French gown, a full orchestra, flowing champagne, elaborate fountains, and a dazzling fireworks display. As I observed them basking in accolades for their ostentatious generosity, they raised their glasses to me, their laughter echoing hollowly. "Thanks for the gift." They presumed my ignorance, believing me too polite, too compliant, too forgiving. Yet what they failed to grasp was that I had already uncovered the falsified documents, engaged with the buyers, and retained legal counsel. At the precise moment they were reveling in their ballroom toasts, they were just hours away from losing every ill-gotten gain they thought they had secured. I smiled. I bided my time. Then I revealed, "You should examine your mail." What they discovered irrevocably altered everything. This isn't just a narrative of betrayal. It's an account of how I reclaimed what was rightfully mine, legally, financially, and emotionally. So stay with me, because by the story's end, you'll understand why sometimes the most effective retribution is the one they never anticipate until it's far too late. Claire Emerson, a 36-year-old architect residing in Boston, is renowned for her quiet resolve, elegant designs, and an innate ability to discern order amidst chaos. She deliberately lives alone, cultivating a serene existence centered on her profession. Nevertheless, beneath her composed demeanor lies a woman profoundly shaped by extensive summers spent at a lakeside cabin, summers that instilled in her the virtues of tranquility, resilience, and a bond that once held immeasurable significance. Each summer of her formative years, Claire Emerson meticulously packed a small suitcase and boarded a northbound train destined for Lake Wyman, where her grandfather, Jack Whittaker, had personally erected a weathered cabin. These 3 months were sacrosanct, providing a stark contrast to the clamour and neglect of her urban life. While other children attended camps or watched cartoons indoors, Claire devoted her days to learning how to sand wood, patiently fishing, and attuning herself to the stillness that enveloped the lake just before dusk. Jack was more than just her grandfather. He was her mentor, her protector, and in many respects, her refuge. A retired carpenter who had spent the majority of his life working with his hands, Jack valued enduring things: sturdy oak beams, robust iron hinges, and unbreakable promises. He had christened the lake house Harbour's Rest, and for Claire, it embodied precisely that. Every floorboard and every creak of the dock resonated with a memory. Every summer was punctuated by understated yet meaningful rituals. Morning coffee on the porch with 2 steaming mugs, dawn fishing excursions, and the commingled scent of pine and sawdust as Jack engaged in repairs he never quite completed. Claire had a sister, Heather, who was 5 years her junior. Heather also visited the cabin, but her stays were always brief. Where Claire found peace, Heather perceived only tedium. She was perpetually eager to return to her friends, her phone, and her creature comforts. Heather was beautiful, vivacious, and quick to command attention, whereas Claire often receded into the background, favouring books over brunches and hiking boots over high heels. Their parents, Elizabeth and Thomas, consistently gravitated towards Heather's needs. They lauded her charm and indulged her every whim, while Claire was largely expected to navigate life independently. It wasn't exactly resentment Claire felt, but rather a quiet understanding that she would never occupy the central position in anyone's life in the way Heather did, with the singular exception of Jack. It was Jack who noticed when Claire temporarily retreated into silence in the 5th grade, devastated by a teacher's harsh words. It was Jack who presented her with her first set of drafting pencils when she evinced an interest in architecture and design. And it was Jack who, during those summers at Harbour's Rest, made her feel precisely where she was meant to be. When Claire turned 16, Jack permitted her to pilot the boat across the lake unassisted. At 22, fresh out of college, he instructed her on the proper procedure for winterizing the cabin. And when she secured her inaugural position at an architectural firm, it was Jack who dispatched a 3-page handwritten letter expressing his profound pride. 6 years ago, Jack passed away. His death, though anticipated, was utterly devastating. He had left a will, and everyone presumed the lake house would be divided or sold. However, when the lawyer began reading his instructions, a palpable hush fell over the room. To my granddaughter Claire, who comprehends the value of solitude and the essence of a quiet life, I bequeath Harbour's Rest and all its contents. A thick, uncomfortable silence followed. Claire recalled her mother's thin, tight-lipped smile. "Well, you were always his favourite," Elizabeth had remarked, her words sweet yet barbed. Her father, Thomas, averted his gaze, and Heather crossed her arms, visibly annoyed. But Claire scarcely registered their reactions. Her only thought was that somehow, even in death, Jack had truly seen her. He had understood the profound significance of the lake house. It wasn't merely property, it was memory, it was home. The ensuing years were bustling. Claire immersed herself in her firm, crafting designs that mirrored the balance and simplicity she had absorbed from Jack. Yet, every few months, she would escape to Harbour's Rest. She would meticulously clean the gutters, mend the roof, and traverse the trails Jack once explored. It remained her sanctuary, seemingly untouched by the passage of time. Until one summer, she discovered evidence that someone had been there without her knowledge. A light left on, a door not fully secured, a photo frame slightly askew, and with that, the tranquility began to dissipate. Something was amiss, and just like that, her world, carefully constructed and sustained by memories, was on the precipice of a profound upheaval. Claire sat quietly in the polished, oak-panelled office of Mr. Hollingsworth, her grandfather's long-standing attorney, her hands clasped neatly in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting a dappled glow across the large wooden table where her parents, David and Mary Ann Emerson, sat rigidly beside her younger sister Heather. 3 months had elapsed since Jack Emerson's passing, and this was the day his final wishes would finally be publicly declared. Claire had steeled herself for any eventuality, but she had not anticipated the reading of the will to ignite such a combustible fuse of family tension. Mr. Hollingsworth adjusted his spectacles and commenced. He enumerated a few modest bequests to elderly friends and charitable organisations. Then came the pivotal moment that irrevocably altered everything. "To my beloved granddaughter Claire Emerson," he enunciated slowly, "who has consistently honoured the value of solitude, craftsmanship, and the serenity of the lake, who, like me, understands that some places are sacred, I bequeath the lake house, with all its contents, solely and completely." A profound silence enveloped the room. Claire's breath hitched, her heart thumping, not from avarice, but from the overwhelming weight of what that home represented to her. It encapsulated their summers, her childhood, her unbreakable bond with her grandfather, all woven into its very wood and stone. A quiet, aching gratitude swelled within her, but that gratitude swiftly dissipated as she observed the expressions on the faces around her. Mary Ann's lips curled into a thin smile that failed to reach her eyes. "Well, of course he left it to Claire," she declared with a brittle tone. "He always favoured her. Jack could never conceal that." David shifted uncomfortably beside her. "That house should have been divided between the girls. That would have been fair, not merely handed over like some trophy." Claire began to speak, but Heather interjected first. Are you telling me he gave her the whole thing? Heather's voice was sharp-edged with disbelief and escalating anger. Just Claire? Not even a share? I spent summers there too, you know. I have memories. I was part of that place. Claire maintained her composure. Even Heather, I know it means something to you too. I never asked for it. I didn't know he planned this, but maybe we can still go up together sometime if you'd like. Heather scoffed and looked away. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That place is worth a small fortune now. He always had a soft spot for you. This just proves it. Claire glanced at Mr. Hollingsworth, who, to his credit, appeared slightly embarrassed. Your grandfather was very explicit, he stated. He left this house to Claire alone. He updated the will just last year. I have it in writing and on video. The drive back to Boston that evening was silent. Claire sat in the back seat while her parents conversed in hushed tones in the front, and Heather stared moodily out the window. The atmosphere between them had shifted, now heavy with unspoken resentment. Once home, Claire entered her small apartment, kicked off her shoes, and sat on the edge of her bed. She retrieved the old journal her grandfather had gifted her when she turned 16. On the inside cover, a note in his meticulous handwriting read, "If ever the world turns its back on you, come home to the lake. It'll still be there. I built it for peace, and I hope you find yours there too." That line now echoed in her mind like a prophecy. He must have known. Somehow he had sensed that a time would come when Claire would require something that could not be taken from her, something unshakable, a sanctuary. Yet, instead of peace, the inheritance had created a fault line within the family. Claire could already feel it widening beneath her feet. Heather's resentment smouldered like a slow burn, thinly veiled by civility, but simmering with every exchanged glance. And her parents, rather than concealing their disappointment, began to treat her differently in subtle but perceptible ways. Less warmth in their voices, fewer invitations to family dinners, passive-aggressive remarks about quote 0 and quote 1, Claire did not regret inheriting the lake house. But she had also not anticipated it costing her so much so swiftly. What was once her sanctuary now existed in her mind as both a blessing and a burden. Yet she clung to Jack's parting words. If the world turns its back, come home. Little did she realize then that these very words would soon face an unforeseen and formidable test. Claire returned to Boston that night, carrying an unfamiliar heaviness, one she couldn't dislodge. While she had always understood the unique significance of the lake house to her in ways her family might never grasp, the will's reading had unearthed a considerably deeper chasm. For the time being, she buried these unsettling emotions under a deluge of work deadlines and architectural blueprints, her accustomed method of coping. Life, at least on the surface, continued to unfold. A few weeks later, the family converged once more, this time to celebrate joyous news. Heather had just become engaged to Tyler Morgan, son of George Morgan, a prominent businessman from upstate New York. Tyler was tall, impeccably dressed, and polite in the expected manner of those raised with inherited wealth. He was employed at his father's financial consulting firm and drove a car whose cost exceeded Claire's annual office rent. Claire had briefly encountered him during Thanksgiving and primarily recalled his charming smile and his complete disinterest in anyone else's conversation. Nevertheless, Heather was absolutely radiant. "He proposed in Paris," Heather announced during brunch at their parents' residence, her diamond ring sparkling as she gestured expressively. "On a rooftop at sunset, with a view of the Eiffel Tower." Their mother gasped, as if she hadn't already heard the story 10 times over. Their father beamed with evident pride. Claire offered a polite smile. Wedding preparations immediately commenced. Heather envisioned a ceremony that would rival royal events. An exclusive oceanside resort in Rhode Island was secured within a fortnight for a destination wedding. The venue boasted a private chapel, a vineyard, and an estate capable of accommodating 200 guests. Her gown was custom designed in Paris, A full 10-piece orchestra was engaged for both the ceremony and the reception. Tyler insisted on drone footage of the entire day, including a dramatic flyover during the vows, which Heather deemed utterly cinematic. Claire endured family dinners and planning sessions as if a detached observer. She wasn't envious. This lifestyle had never appealed to her, but she felt progressively estranged by the sheer extravagance. Heather treated the wedding as both a full-time occupation and a defining identity. Every discussion began with floral arrangements, progressed to guest lists, and culminated in disputes over lighting design colours. One evening, Claire invited Heather to dinner, hoping for a quiet moment to connect. Over grilled salmon and a glass of wine, she finally broached the topic. "I know this wedding must be expensive," she began gently. "I can't offer much, but I'd be happy to contribute something, perhaps $5,000, to help with the flowers or the photographer." Heather blinked, momentarily stunned, then let out a small, mirthless laugh. "Claire, that's sweet of you, but we have it covered. Tyler's parents are contributing, and so are Mum and Dad. We don't need your donation." Claire leaned back in her chair, attempting to disregard the sting in Heather's tone. "It wasn't a donation," she clarified. "I just thought I could help." "You don't have to," Heather interjected, dismissing the idea as she gestured to the waiter. "Honestly, it's already taken care of. We've got everything planned." Yet, something about Heather's pronouncement left Claire feeling uneasy. "You're sure everything's within budget?" Claire inquired. Heather waved her off. "Totally. Dad said not to worry. They've got a financial plan." The words "financial plan" reverberated in Claire's mind long after that dinner. Her parents were not renowned for their meticulous budgeting. Growing up, she had witnessed them go to extraordinary lengths for Heather's ballet lessons, her perpetually broken phones, and her fashion whims, all while Claire was instructed to take a summer job if she desired art supplies or a class trip. The mere mention of a plan ignited a quiet alarm bell in the recesses of her mind. Later that week, she called her mother, ostensibly to check in, but subtly to inquire about how the wedding expenses were being managed. Her mother responded with vague assurances. "Oh, we've got it figured out, honey. You just focus on your work. You don't need to worry about us." "I just don't want you to put yourselves under too much strain," Claire countered. "Don't be silly," her mother replied. "This is what parents do. We want the best for Heather." Claire hung up, feeling dismissed, yet unconvinced. Something simply didn't feel right. The venue alone likely cost upwards of $40,000. Add in the dress, catering, musicians, photographers, and a 3-week honeymoon in Tuscany, and the figures ceased to align. Despite her reservations, Claire pushed the worry aside. Perhaps Tyler's family genuinely was contributing. Perhaps her parents possessed undisclosed savings, and maybe, she told herself, it wasn't her place to intervene. Still, the seed of doubt had been sown, and in time, it would blossom into something she could no longer ignore. For now, however, the wedding machine forged ahead, dazzling in its magnificence, oblivious to the questions it left in its wake. Claire didn't dwell on it the first time. It was a casual telephone conversation with her mother, a brief check-in about weekend plans and the prospect of an imminent family gathering. Claire, feeling the escalating pressure of wedding talk and yearning for tranquility, had suggested spending the upcoming weekend at the lake house. The weather was improving, and after a protracted Boston winter, the idea of retreating to Harbour's Rest with a good book and a thermos of tea presented itself as the ideal escape. "I thought I'd head up to the cabin this weekend," she offered. "Check in, do a little maintenance. I could really use the quiet." A pause, a fraction of a second too long, hung on the other end. "Oh, honey, there's no need," her mother quickly interjected. "We already had someone check on the place last week. Hired a handyman, local fellow. He said everything looks great." Claire blinked, slightly surprised. "You hired someone?" "Yes, we just thought it'd save you the trouble. You're busy with work and all." We've been meaning to help out more with the property. Her mother's tone was overly cheerful, almost rehearsed. Claire didn't argue, but an unsettling sensation stirred within her. In all the years since she had inherited the house, her parents had never once displayed interest in assisting with its upkeep. Not during windstorms, not after a raccoon invaded the roof, not even when she had single-handedly restained the entire porch one summer. This sudden burst of enthusiasm seemed out of character. Still, she let it go. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps they were attempting to mend fences after the awkwardness surrounding the will. Perhaps it truly was just an effort to be helpful. But Claire couldn't shake a faint chill beneath the warmth of her mother's words. A few days later, the second signal arrived, and it couldn't be so easily dismissed. Claire had just returned home from a site visit when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She let it go to voicemail. An hour later, while preparing tea, she finally listened. "Claire, dear, it's Dorothy Myers," the message began. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I just wanted to say it was a shame we didn't get a chance to say goodbye. I didn't know you'd sold the lake house. It's a lovely young couple who moved in, very friendly, but still, I'll miss seeing you up here in the summers." Claire's hand froze on the kettle. Sold. Her initial thought was that Dorothy must have misunderstood. Perhaps someone new had rented a nearby property, or the couple were merely temporary guests. Still, Claire's stomach knotted. Dorothy had resided 2 doors down from Harbour's Rest for 30 years. She was sharp, meticulous, and not prone to muddle details. Claire immediately called her back. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't mean to upset you," Dorothy said. "I just assumed you'd moved on. The for sale sign was up for about 2 weeks, then suddenly down again. Then a moving truck came, and the couple's been there ever since. I figured it was your decision." Claire felt her mouth go dry. "Dorothy, I never put the house up for sale." A long silence ensued on the other end. "Well, then I think you might want to come take a look." After hanging up, Claire attempted to calm her racing thoughts. She logged into her county property tax account to check for updates. Each year, she received a mailed notice about taxes due on the lake house. It typically arrived in early spring. She hadn't received one this year, but with the wedding and work deadlines, she had assumed it was merely delayed. Now she realized she hadn't seen the email notice either. She checked her inbox again. Nothing, not even in spam. She called the county clerk's office. "Yes, Miss Emerson," the clerk confirmed after a brief hold. "Our records show a change of ownership processed about 6 weeks ago. New documents filed under Robert and Mary Ann Emerson." Claire's blood ran cold. She hung up and turned to her personal banking account simply to feel grounded. But the anxiety only intensified. A recent security alert stood out. New device login from unknown IP. Her financial advisor had sent her a follow-up email 2 days earlier, querying whether she had authorized a login from a location in Vermont. She hadn't. Quickly, she changed all her passwords, implemented 2-step verification, and alerted her bank's fraud department. As she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, hands trembling, the unease solidified into something harder, colder. This was no misunderstanding. This was not a well-intentioned handyman or a neighbor confused by a sign. This was something entirely different. Someone had tampered with her accounts, interfered with her mail, and possibly somehow transferred ownership of the only place in the world that felt truly hers. She didn't possess all the answers yet, but for the first time, Claire felt the ground begin to crumble beneath her, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that someone profoundly close to her had committed the unthinkable. Claire departed Boston ahead of dawn, her hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, her mind awash with turbulent thoughts. The GPS indicated a journey of just under 3 hours, but the drive to Harbour's Rest felt infinitely longer, heavier with an unspoken weight. She had traversed that familiar, circuitous route every summer for years, past the accustomed general store, the weathered sign for the canoe rental shack, and the faded "Welcome to Wyman Lake" banner, hanging askew on the fence post at the town's periphery. Yet, nothing felt welcoming now. As she turned onto the gravel driveway, her spirits plummeted. The hand-carved sign at the entrance, a creation of her grandfather decades ago, bearing the words "Harbour's Rest" etched into its wood, was gone. The posts remained, but the plank had been removed. She halted in front of the house and her breath hitched. The shutters had been repainted a different colour. The porch swing was no longer there. The front door now featured a new, gleaming lock keypad entry, replacing the simple brass knob her grandfather had installed. For a moment, Claire remained motionless in her car, gazing at the house that outwardly resembled hers, but felt profoundly alien. She stepped out deliberately and approached the door, uncertain of what she would even utter. Before she could knock, the door opened. A middle-aged woman with short, silvering hair and a kind smile appeared. Behind her stood a tall man in khakis and a baseball cap, waving warmly. "Hi there," the woman greeted. "You must be from next door. We've been meaning to introduce ourselves." Claire blinked. "Actually, I'm Claire Emerson. This was my grandfather's house." The woman tilted her head, surprised. "Oh, Jack Emerson's granddaughter. My goodness, I'm so sorry. We didn't realise." "Well, I'm Sarah Peterson. This is my husband, Mark. We bought the house from your parents a few weeks ago." Claire stared at them, her stomach churning. "My parents?" "Yes, Robert and Elaine Emerson, correct," Sarah confirmed. "They handled everything, said the property was part of a family estate. We didn't know you were still around. I hope we haven't caused any upset." Mark gestured politely. "Would you like to come in? You're welcome to take a look. We haven't moved much in yet." Claire hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the house had been subtly rearranged. Nothing drastic, but enough to make her feel like an intruder in a dream-like distortion of her own memories. She surveyed the stripped mantel, the missing photographs, the absence of Jack's old tool chest. Everything personal had been removed. "We kept the original paperwork in a binder," Sarah offered, opening a side drawer and retrieving a folder. "Everything's in there. The title, transfer, closing documents, notarized forms. We like to keep things organised." Claire accepted the folder with trembling hands and leafed through the pages. There, staring back at her, was a signature bearing her name. It looked similar, almost impeccable, but she instantly recognised it as not her own. Listed above it were the names of the sellers, Robert Emerson and Elaine Emerson, her parents. And below that, the notary seal dated 6 weeks ago. Her voice quivered, but she composed herself. "I never signed this. I didn't authorise this sale." The Petersons looked horrified. "Oh dear," Sarah exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest. "We're so sorry. We bought it in good faith. We had no idea." "I believe you," Claire said quietly, "but I'm going to need to speak with my attorney." Back in her car, parked beneath the towering pines that once shaded her childhood summers, Claire dialed Jessica Cole, a former college classmate and now one of Boston's sharpest real estate attorneys. Jessica was the only person Claire trusted to handle such a sensitive situation. Jessica answered on the second ring. "Claire, what's wrong?" Claire inhaled slowly. "The lake house. It's been sold by my parents. I just saw the papers. My name is forged." There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice came, calm and clear. "You're absolutely sure?" "Yes, I'm holding the documents now." "Then send me high-res photos of every page. We'll start with a full document analysis and contact the county recorder. If your signature was forged and the sellers weren't the legal owners, we can move fast. Claire, this is a criminal matter, but we can undo this. We can take it back." Claire stared at the house once more before driving away. As she descended the gravel path and returned to the highway, the trees appeared taller, darker, the sky more overcast. The betrayal had solidified from suspicion into fact, now possessing a name and a verifiable paper trail. Her sanctuary had been pilfered, yet Jessica's voice echoed in her mind, steady and unwavering. We can undo this. We can take it back. Jessica worked with remarkable swiftness. Within 24 hours of receiving Claire's scanned sale documents, she had already identified multiple red flags. The notary stamp used on the deed was registered to a woman named Pamela Raw, a licensed notary based in southern Vermont. Jessica immediately placed a call, introducing herself and calmly explaining the situation. Pamela was aghast. "I've never notarized anything for a Claire Emerson," she stated firmly. "I don't even practice in Massachusetts, and that stamp, if it has my seal and signature on it, must have been forged. I lost a notary journal and my seal last December. Someone broke into my locked cabinet at a community center during an event. I filed a report with the county office." Jessica's voice sharpened. "Did the report include the seal number?" "Yes, I have a copy of it here. Do you want the incident number?" "Please," Jessica said. "That helps more than you know." Within the hour, Claire and Jessica were seated together in Jessica's office, a neat but resolute space above a downtown real estate brokerage. The timeline was rapidly falling into place, and the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the sale of Harbor's Rest wasn't merely unethical, it was criminal. Jessica opened her laptop and scrolled through property transfer logs available from the county's public records. "Here," she indicated, pointing. "Transfer of title filed 6 weeks ago. Seller listed as Robert and Elaine Emerson. Buyer, Mark and Sarah Peterson. Sale price, $320,000. Claire frowned. "That's way too low. The last appraisal was over $500,000. Jessica nodded grimly. "Exactly. That property, with its lakefront access and history, should have fetched at least $500,000 more if they'd waited a month or two for high season. But someone was in a rush." Claire exhaled. "And the Petersons had no idea." "No, they were innocent buyers. They thought they were getting a good deal on a fast-sale estate transfer. I reached out to their realtor, and she confirmed they were told the family wanted to offload the property quickly due to emotional associations. Classic cover." Claire leaned back, absorbing the magnitude of the deception. "So, my parents—" Jessica raised a hand. "Hold that thought. There's more." She handed Claire a printed spreadsheet from her desktop. "I asked you to check your financial accounts last night. Good instincts. Here's what I found once I got access to your flagged transactions." Claire scanned the document. Most of it appeared routine. Then her eyes halted on a cluster of withdrawals, 4 in total, transferred from her savings account via an old joint account she'd once linked to assist her parents after her father's knee surgery years ago. She had forgotten it even existed. $7,850 to Lux Bridal Boston, $12,400 to D'Amato Jewelers, $21,000 to Lemaire Resort Group, and $9,600 to a videography service based in Providence, specializing in drone footage and cinematic wedding packages. Claire stared. "Those are wedding payments." Jessica nodded. "Every one of them made within 2 weeks of the house sale, all withdrawn from your funds." "My funds?" Claire repeated, her voice hollow. "They sold my house, forged my name, and used my money to fund Heather's wedding." Jessica leaned forward, her voice steady. "Claire, what they did falls under multiple categories of fraud: forgery, identity theft, real estate fraud, misappropriation of funds, and we have the paper trail to prove it. Your parents forged the sale, took a below-market offer, and used the proceeds, along with your account access, to pay for a luxury wedding under the pretense that it was all covered." Claire said nothing for a moment, letting the facts sink in. She felt as if she was suspended between disbelief and fury. Every justification her parents had given her now reeked of manipulation. All the warm dismissals, the phony cheer, the insistence that they had a financial plan. The betrayal was vaster than she had imagined. She looked up, her voice quiet but unwavering. "What do we do next?" Jessica didn't hesitate. "We open a civil case. We file a motion to freeze all assets associated with the sale. We contact the county clerk with the affidavit from the notary, and we file a formal criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. Claire nodded slowly. And the Petersons? They'll be protected, Jessica said. Once this is settled, they'll either be refunded or you'll buy the property back, but you'll get your house back legally and fully. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, something had shifted. The disbelief was gone. In its place was an unshakable clarity. It was no longer just about the lake house. It was about everything they had taken without asking, and everything she would now reclaim. For 2 nights following her meeting with Jessica, Claire found sleep elusive. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, every betrayal, every number on that spreadsheet. The evidence was irrefutable. The law was on her side. And yet, a part of her heart hesitated. She did not wish to sabotage her sister's wedding. She did not want to be remembered as the bitter one who arrived with court orders and accusations, while flower girls scattered petals on a meticulously manicured aisle. Regardless of her parents' actions, no matter how deliberately they had stolen from her, Claire still clung to the conviction that a family should not be publicly fractured. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she brewed herself a cup of coffee and settled at the kitchen table, poring over the initial draft of the legal complaint, meticulously prepared by Jessica. A palpable tightness gripped her chest, a tempest of anger warring with the urge for restraint. A quiet whisper inside cautioned, "You owe them absolutely nothing." Yet another voice insisted, "Hold off until after the wedding. Avoid creating a scene." Claire, famously, had never been one for drama. Even in her youth, she'd internalized the lesson that her emotions were unwelcome. So, she breathed deeply, made no rash decisions, and left the unsigned document resting on her desk. The following afternoon, while returning from a site inspection, her phone buzzed with an alert. Megan, a college friend, had tagged her in a Facebook comment. Claire opened the application without much thought until she saw the post. It was from Heather. A meticulously filtered photograph depicted them as children at the lake house, Heather adorned with a flower crown, Claire gently holding her hand. The caption read, "I've always admired my big sister. She sacrificed so much for me, her time, her space, even her legacy, so I could have the wedding of my dreams. She chose a simple life, content to remain in the background and let me shine. That, truly, is what real love looks like. Thank you, Claire, for your sacrifice. I promise I'll make you proud." Claire read it twice, then a third time. Sacrifice. She couldn't discern which stung more, the utter insincerity of the tone or the public display of virtue. There was no acknowledgement of the theft, no hint of remorse, just a polished deception veiled in flowery gratitude, portraying Claire not as a victim, but as some silent martyr who had willingly surrendered her life's most cherished inheritance. She scrolled through the comments. Strangers left hearts and tearful emojis. Family friends extolled Heather's grace and maturity. "You're incredibly fortunate to have a sister like Claire," one wrote. Another added, "She must truly adore you to give you so much." Claire's hands trembled. It was no longer merely theft. It was erasure. Her silence was being twisted into permission. Her pain was being reframed into a narrative that painted Heather as selfless and noble. The house, the money, the betrayal, these weren't secrets Heather was embarrassed by. They were now elements of a carefully orchestrated performance, a celebration of her ability to seize what she desired while appearing angelic in the process. In that precise moment, something within Claire hardened. She closed the app and opened her desktop folder labeled Legal. She began meticulously organizing every screenshot, every receipt, every banking document. She exported the notary's affidavit and added it to her growing pile of evidence. She pulled up a pristine document and commenced writing a letter to the district attorney's office, clear, concise, and thoroughly substantiated by facts. Then she opened her video editor and started assembling a visual timeline. Photographs of the house before and after the sale, copies of the forged signature, footage of her grandfather's will reading, and scans of her bank account clearly illustrating the stolen funds. If they wanted a story, she would deliver one, but it would be the unvarnished truth. By midnight, she had drafted a formal complaint to the county recorder, a cease and desist order for the real estate agent who had filed the fraudulent paperwork, and an outline for a public statement. Not for revenge, but for clarity, for dignity, for justice. She would not be silenced. She would not be rewritten. Heather had transformed Claire's life into a mere stepping stone for her social fairy tale. But Claire still possessed something far more potent than any venue, dress, or drone-shot video. She held the truth, and now she was prepared to wield it. The Morgan estate in Newport appeared to have been plucked directly from a royal fairy tale. Guests arrived in black tie attire, their heels echoing against the imported marble pathway that led to a white arch adorned with silks from Lyon. 2 valets efficiently managed the stream of luxury vehicles. Crystal chandeliers hung gracefully from ancient oak trees, and live classical music drifted through the warm afternoon air from a Steinway grand piano positioned meticulously beneath a rose-covered pergola. Guests exchanged hushed whispers about the exorbitant cost, the dazzling spectacle, the sheer splendor. It transcended being merely a wedding. It was a grand exhibition of wealth and impeccable perfection. From a distance, Claire observed the entire scene with an unusual detachment. Her pale blue gown was subtly understated amidst the glittering sequins and designer labels surrounding her. She lingered at the periphery of the crowd, her expression composed and serene. No one could have possibly fathomed the knowledge she held or the plans she had set in motion. The ceremony commenced precisely at 5:30 p.m. A string quartet took over as Heather emerged at the top of the aisle in a custom French gown that shimmered brilliantly in the light. Tyler stood at the altar, looking every bit the polished heir. Claire watched her sister glide towards her future, her veil trailing like a fine mist, her smile radiant and seemingly untouchable. The crowd rose in a well-rehearsed motion. Drones hovered overhead, capturing every moment with cinematic precision. Claire said nothing. At the reception, guests sipped champagne beneath the warm glow of hanging lanterns. The ballroom had been transformed into an enchanting garden of orchids and gold-trimmed decor. A full orchestra had replaced the string quartet. Fireworks, synchronized to classical music, illuminated the night sky. Waiters in pristine white gloves moved with the grace of dancers, serving elaborate 5-course meals paired with wines specially flown in from Tuscany. It was extravagant to the point of satire, yet no one seemed to notice, too absorbed in the overwhelming spectacle. Claire navigated through the throng, moving slowly, politely acknowledging acquaintances, speaking little. Her parents radiated pride at the center table, appearing like royalty themselves. Her mother wore a floor-length gown Claire recognized from a high-end boutique in Back Bay. Her father, clutching a scotch, looked excessively pleased with himself. When Claire approached, her father greeted her with a broad grin and outstretched arms. "There she is," he exclaimed, raising his glass, "the one who made all of this possible." Claire maintained a measured expression. "Glad I could be here." Her mother interjected, half laughing. "We were just remarking what a gift you've bestowed upon this family. Thank you, Claire, for your generosity." Claire nodded once. "Of course." Later that evening, after the dancing had commenced and the night air was heavy with the scents of perfume and champagne, Heather took the microphone. A respectful hush fell over the guests as the bride stood beneath a cascade of white orchids, a glass of wine in hand, a healthy glow colouring her cheeks. "I know I'm supposed to toast my new husband," she began with a charming laugh. "But before I do, I want to raise a glass to someone else." She turned toward Claire, their eyes meeting across the room. "To my sister, Claire. You've always been quiet, selfless, strong. You've given me more than I ever deserved. You chose peace over drama. You let me have this day, this dream. You gave up something precious to you without ever asking for anything in return. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the crowd. Heather's voice softened. I know you don't like attention, but I want everyone here to know I see your sacrifice. I will never forget what you've done for me. You're the reason this day is possible. The applause swelled. Claire felt every pair of eyes turn to her with a blend of pity, admiration, and slight confusion. In their perception, she was the saintly sister, the silent benefactor, the quiet woman in the corner who had gracefully receded so another could shine. Claire stood, glass in hand. She offered a faint smile. Well, she said, her voice clear and calm, I'm glad you think so, Heather, and I do hope you enjoy every part of today. The music, the dress, the wine. She paused, her gaze unwavering. And when you wake up tomorrow, make sure you check your mailbox. A brief, awkward silence descended, a fleeting flicker of uncertainty, before the orchestra resumed, and the moment passed like a cloud drifting across the moon. Heather's smile faltered almost imperceptibly, but she quickly recovered, raising her glass again with another laugh, and the guests joined her. Claire sat down, her expression unaltered. She had conveyed what she needed to. The remainder was already in motion. Letters had been dispatched. Files had been submitted. Court dates were set. This day belonged to Heather. Tomorrow would belong to Claire. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the first courier rang the doorbell at the Emerson home. Elaine was in the kitchen finishing her coffee. Robert was engrossed in the newspaper at the dining table. They had only just returned from the wedding after-party the night before. The house still hummed with the lingering aura of celebration. Flowers adorned every surface. Champagne flutes awaited washing in the sink. Heather's wedding dress hung meticulously in the guest room, awaiting preservation. The last thing either of them expected was a manila envelope addressed to both of them, delivered via certified courier with a signature request. Elaine signed absently and opened the envelope, a faint smile still lingering on her face. That smile vanished within moments. Inside was a thick stack of documents. A formal complaint, a comprehensive report detailing property transfer fraud, a notarized affidavit from Pamela Raw unequivocally stating her seal had been stolen, a forensic handwriting report proving the forged signature, and a demand for the immediate return of all proceeds from the illegal sale. Attached were screenshots of banking transactions, photographic evidence of the Lake House transfer logs, and an official notice from Claire's attorney, Jessica Cole, warning of impending civil and criminal action. Robert stared at the pages, his face slowly blanching. Elaine clutched the edge of the kitchen counter. Across town, other packages were arriving. One was delivered to the Morgan family estate, handed directly to Tyler's father by a second courier. Another package arrived at the office of the wedding planner, alerting them that the source of funds for the services rendered was under investigation. Even the videographer received a cease and desist regarding the use of drone footage on social media, as the property featured was now inextricably linked to an ongoing legal dispute. Before noon, Claire's phone rang, eliciting the day's first swift reaction. She sat calmly on her apartment deck, tea in hand, a folder of supporting evidence beside her. Recognizing the caller ID, she allowed the phone to ring once before answering. Hello? Heather's voice, thin and wavering between disbelief and fury, immediately cut through the air. Are you serious right now? You sent legal documents to the house on my honeymoon. Claire maintained an even tone. I told you to check your mailbox. This is insane. You're destroying everything. Do you realize what this looks like? What people are going to think? Claire simply responded, I don't care what people think. I care what's true. You could have waited. You could have talked to me privately. You didn't have to humiliate us. Claire's voice sharpened slightly. I gave you a chance. Multiple chances. You didn't just take the house. You let them use my name, my money, my silence. And then you turned me into a prop for your perfect wedding. Heather fell silent for a moment before declaring, "You're ruining the family. You know that?" Claire exhaled. "No, you already did that. I'm just cleaning up." The call abruptly ended. Claire gazed at her phone for a long moment before setting it face down on the table. That afternoon, an email arrived from her mother. It had no subject line, just a single sentence. "We need to talk. Can we meet just the three of us?" Claire's succinct reply was, "I'll meet, but not alone." The following day, at 2 p.m. sharp, Claire arrived at a neutral law office in Cambridge. Dressed in a simple navy suit and carrying a leather-bound folder, she found her parents already seated in the small conference room. The last 48 hours had visibly aged them. Robert appeared defensive, while Elaine looked pleading. Jessica entered with Claire, sitting beside her, poised and composed. Elaine began softly. "Thank you for coming. We understand that you're upset." Claire offered no response, allowing Jessica to open the folder instead. "We're beyond upset," Jessica stated professionally. "We're dealing with criminal misconduct, forgery, real estate fraud, unauthorized access to financial accounts. It's not about feelings anymore." Robert cleared his throat. "There must be some way to resolve this quietly, as a family." Claire finally spoke. "You had every opportunity to act like family. Instead, you acted like thieves." Elaine leaned forward. "If we agree to pay back what we took, can we settle this privately?" Claire glanced at Jessica, who then presented a second document. "This is a repayment schedule," Jessica explained. "It includes restitution for the property sale, financial penalties, and legal costs. If you sign it and pay the first installment by Friday, we can pause further filings. If not, we proceed to court." Robert's jaw tightened. "You would take us to court?" Claire looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You already did," she said. "You just didn't think I'd fight back." The Emerson family, though rarely gathered, now reunited under the roof of the Petersons' home, which they had offered as neutral ground. This encounter bore no resemblance to a celebration, devoid of champagne flutes and floral arrangements, a grim contrast to their last gathering. Claire, acknowledging the Petersons as fellow victims, had agreed to the venue. The air was thick with unspoken tension, amplified by Jessica's calm presence beside Claire, her case folder neatly closed on her lap. Robert and Elaine arrived first, conservatively dressed, their faces etched with anxiety and fatigue. Heather entered last, eyes downcast, her husband noticeably absent. Claire, standing tall and composed, began the meeting without preamble. "I've asked you here because it's time to stop pretending. I've kept quiet long enough." She walked to the end of the table, placed a tablet on a stand and tapped the screen. A slideshow began, simple yet methodical. The first slide displayed the official deed transfer, emblazoned with her forged signature. The second showed bank withdrawals directly linked to wedding vendors. The third presented an affidavit from Pamela Raw, the Vermont notary, attesting to her stolen seal and forged signature. Following these were emails, timelines, and finally, a summary of the pending legal penalties if no agreement was reached. Elaine sat motionless, her face flushed. Robert's lips pressed into a thin line. Heather looked on the verge of tears. Claire allowed the silence to linger before speaking again. "I wanted this to be private. I gave all of you chances to come clean." Jessica added evenly, "You didn't. If we go to court, this will all become public record. The forgery, the theft, the manipulation. But Claire has agreed to give you one opportunity to resolve this here." At that precise moment, Sarah and Mark Peterson entered the room, carrying a manila folder of their own. Elaine stiffened at their sight. Sarah offered a sad smile. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," Sarah said gently, addressing Claire. "But I think you deserve the truth too." She then turned to Elaine. "You didn't think I'd remember you, did you?" Elaine's jaw clenched. "This isn't the time I think it is." Sarah continued. You and I worked together at St. Mary's when our kids were toddlers. I was in HR. You were an office manager. I remember you well. So, when we saw the listing for the lake house, I was surprised but not suspicious. You said it was your property. You never mentioned your daughter was the legal heir. Claire turned toward her mother. You knew the buyers? Elaine looked down. They offered cash. You thought you could pass it off as yours? Claire's voice was sharper now. You counted on me not noticing, on me being too loyal, too quiet. Heather shifted in her seat. She hadn't spoken until now, but when Claire's eyes met hers, she looked away. I'm sorry, Heather whispered, her voice brittle. You knew. I saw one of the documents. A few days before the wedding, it had your name. But Dad said you'd agreed that it was handled, and I needed the wedding to go smoothly. I didn't ask questions. Claire let the weight of that statement hang in the air. I needed the wedding. Not, I'm sorry I let them steal from you. Not, I tried to stop it. Just a confession of convenience. Jessica opened her folder and slid a printed sheet across the table. Her voice clipped but professional, she stated, These are Claire's terms. 1. Full restitution of the $320,000 from the sale of the house. 2. Public acknowledgement that Claire was the rightful owner and the transaction was conducted fraudulently. 3. A written apology to be shared with the Petersons and legal representatives. 4. The immediate closure of any financial accounts in Claire's name or linked to her estate. 5. Both Robert and Elaine must attend family mediation and psychological evaluation before any further contact with Claire is allowed. Elaine inhaled sharply. You want us to see a therapist? Claire returned, You weaponized my love for this family. You used it against me. I want proof that if I ever speak to you again, it won't be as someone you can manipulate. Robert looked like he might explode, but remained silent. His silence was permission. Heather finally looked at her sister fully, her voice cracking. Do you hate me? Claire paused. The room was still. I don't hate you, she said, but I don't trust you, and trust is harder to rebuild than a house. In the courtroom's quiet solemnity, the judge's voice resonated with deliberate clarity against the panelled walls as he delivered the ruling. Claire sat upright, hands clasped, listening for the words she had awaited months to hear. The court finds that the property transaction involving Harbour's Rest was executed under fraudulent circumstances. The sale is hereby voided. Legal ownership is restored to Ms. Claire Emerson. A brief pause ensued as the judge turned a page. Furthermore, due to the good faith involvement of the Peterson family and their cooperation throughout the investigation, full restitution for their financial loss will be provided by the defendants, Robert and Elaine Emerson, as part of the negotiated civil settlement. Claire offered no smile, only a quiet nod of acknowledgement. Jessica placed a reassuring hand on her arm, a silent affirmation. Justice, not a loud proclamation, but a steady current, had arrived. The Petersons, seated nearby, exchanged glances of quiet relief. They had never sought a battle, only trusted the wrong people and nearly lost everything. Yet, through Claire's resolve, they would emerge whole. The court ensured not only the repayment of their investment, but also coverage of their legal fees and moving costs, the best possible outcome amidst the worst of betrayals. For Robert and Elaine, prison was avoided, but not without profound consequence. The prosecution had agreed to drop criminal charges in exchange for full cooperation, restitution, and a public statement admitting wrongdoing. However, what they preserved in legal terms, they lost in every other way. Within weeks of the court decision, word infiltrated their town. Friends ceased calling. Church members grew cold. Their bridge club removed them from the roster. Elaine's volunteer group politely suggested her resignation. Robert's old fishing buddies quietly excluded him from the next weekend trip. It wasn't rage, it was silence. the communal judgment that isolates rather than shouts. They were no longer seen as generous retirees or loving parents, but for what they had done. Heather's fall was swifter. Barely a month after the wedding, Tyler filed for annulment. Rumors spread rapidly, but the truth moved faster. Tyler had married Heather not for love, but to boost his image at his father's company. The wedding was a performance, designed to impress investors and clients, projecting an image of stability and respectability. But once the lawsuit went public, and the Emerson name became synonymous with scandal, the facade shattered. Worse still, Heather's own finances began to unravel. The overly extravagant honeymoon had been funded by a personal loan which Tyler had no intention of ever settling. Consequently, creditors began to besiege them with calls, promised vendor discounts evaporated, and her social sphere, once bubbling with admiration and jealousy, devolved into hushed whispers and deliberate avoidance. Claire first learned of the separation from a mutual acquaintance. Heather, it turned out, had relocated to a small flat on the outskirts of town. Her social outings became rare, and she abandoned social media entirely. She was conspicuously absent from the most recent family gathering. When the topic of the wedding arose now, it was no longer met with awe, but rather with a mixture of pity and discomfort. Claire found herself back at Harbour's Rest during the late autumn. The foliage had transformed into brilliant amber and crimson, and the lake lay as placid as glass. She inserted the key into the lock of the house she had believed was lost forever, and stepped inside. The air carried a faint, comforting scent of cedar and memories. She chose not to redecorate immediately, desiring the house to communicate its story before any alterations were made. On her inaugural night back, she sat by the fireplace, cradling a cup of tea, the dancing flames mirrored in her eyes. Her thoughts drifted to her grandfather, the countless summers they had shared, and a promise he had once softly uttered. "If the world turns its back on you, come home." She had indeed returned home, not as a casualty nor as a sister relegated to the shadows, but as the woman who had reclaimed what was rightfully hers. The renovations were a lengthy process, not due to dilapidation, but because Claire wished every nail, every layer of paint, and every meticulously restored detail to resonate with meaning. She preserved the original floorboards where she and her grandfather had left imprints of their summer strolls, sanding each one by hand. She meticulously revarnished the dock, straightened the antiquated weather vane, and reconstructed the tool shed utilizing blueprints Jack had years ago sketched on the reverse of a diner napkin. When she finally reattached the hand-carved wooden sign above the porch, the name Jack's Rest gleamed brilliantly under the late spring sun. The house, once a source of contention, now felt like a reclaimed legacy. One afternoon, amidst decluttering the attic, Claire opened an antique cedar trunk filled with blankets and fishing equipment. Beneath a faded quilt, she discovered a yellowed envelope addressed in meticulous script to Claire. Her breath hitched as she recognized her name. Inside was a letter, postmarked 2 weeks before Jack's passing. It read, "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then life has probably gotten messy. That's how life works. But remember this. The house was never just a place. It was a promise, a place to return to when the world forgets your worth. You are not what others think you are. You are who you decide to be. Don't ever let anyone else determine your value. Not family, not friends, not the world. And if they try, come back here. Remember who you are and start again with love. Jack." Claire slowly folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. She remained seated on the attic floor for an extended period, her eyes moist, yet a smile touched her lips, a smile that arose not from mere delight, but from a quiet, immutable truth. Months elapsed. Summer returned. One day, a humble envelope arrived in her mailbox, bearing Heather's familiar handwriting. Within it was a birth announcement, simple and unadorned, accompanied by a brief note penned in delicate, almost apologetic ink. "She's here." Her name is Leia. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope she might. Would you be her godmother? Claire gazed at the letter, her response not immediate. Instead, she walked down to the dock, allowing the breeze to sift through her hair, observing the water's gentle movement beneath the seasoned boards. That evening, she composed a concise reply. Yes, I'll be there for her, but we live in different worlds now. I'll always protect her. I won't pretend everything's forgotten. Heather never responded. However, a small photograph arrived weeks later. Leia, wrapped in a blue blanket, cradled tenderly in Heather's arms. Claire placed it in a frame beside Jack's letter. Not forgiveness nor reconciliation, but something akin to peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, Claire stepped onto the dock. The air was cool, imbued with the fragrance of pine and aged wood. She stood at the far end, where the boards creaked subtly beneath her weight, and rested her hand upon the railing her grandfather had once constructed. The sky was awash in hues of gold and lavender. The water undulated softly. A loon's call echoed in the distance. Claire closed her eyes. This time, she murmured to herself, I didn't just take the house back. I took back my voice, and I'm not giving it up again. If you've journeyed this far, thank you for witnessing Claire's transformation. A narrative not solely about betrayal and recompense, but about discovering the fortitude to reclaim one's voice after it's been suppressed for too long. Perhaps you recognized a reflection of yourself in Claire, someone who endured, remained silent to preserve harmony. And perhaps, just perhaps, you sensed that profound shift when enough finally became truly enough. Now, we invite your perspective. Have you ever been exploited by those who ought to have safeguarded you? Did you choose to walk away or resolutely hold your ground? Share your experiences in the comments below. We meticulously read every narrative. And if Claire's journey resonated with you, sparked indignation, or inspired cheer, please subscribe. We have a continuous stream of similar stories, tales of redemption, chronicles of quiet resilience, and narratives that serve as a potent reminder that you are not alone. Until our next encounter, remember, the truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Only by actively listening can one truly initiate transformation.